1712. Mid-Atlantic. Late autumn. By every known rule of seamanship, what happened next should not have been survived. A three-masted trading vessel, oak ribs, tarred rope, iron fastenings already soft with rust, was alone between continents, weeks from land, carrying nothing meant for war. No escort, no cannon fit for battle, no speed to flee anything that truly wanted it dead. The Atlantic was supposed to be empty here. That belief was the only thing keeping men sane. It was wrong. The log records a falling barometer before dawn and a sea that refused to move. Not calm in the gentle sense, calm in the way a held breath feels calm. The wind died so completely that canvas sagged like wet skin. Oars were useless at this displacement. The ship drifted, broadside to the swell, a wooden animal with its throat exposed. History insists this is the moment nothing happens. Ships wait. Men curse the weather. Time passes. Instead, something rose. Not breaking the surface. Not announcing itself. Came up under the keel, slow and deliberate, lifting thousands of tons of water as if testing weight. The hull shuddered. Not a strike, not yet, but a pressure that traveled the length of the ship. Lanterns trembled. Iron rang once deep and wrong. No rational commander would order silence at sea. The ocean does not listen. The captain did anyway, because the men had already stopped breathing. They felt it again, this time nearer the bow, an enormous mass gliding beneath them, matching speed in a dead calm where speed should not exist. The sensation was not of collision but of inspection, as if the ship were cargo being judged. Someone whispered, "Whale." That explanation failed immediately. Whales breach. They roll. They surface to breathe. This thing stayed down, pacing them, its movement too smooth, too controlled. By every known rule of nature, nothing that large should have been able to move like that without announcing itself. A boy vomited over the lee rail and was dragged back before he could be taken. The mate ordered lines checked that did not need checking. Men gripped belaying pins hard enough to splinter wood. No one laughed. No one prayed out loud. Then the sea delivered evidence. A fish drifted into view, large, silver-scaled, its body crushed inward as if pressed by a vice. Not torn, not bitten in half, compressed. One eye bulged loose in its socket. The other was gone entirely. Veterans stared at it the way infantry stare at a shell crater that is too deep to measure. By every known rule of warfare, this was reconnaissance. The captain ordered the carcass pushed away. Food was secondary to certainty, and certainty was now impossible. The ship resumed drifting. The horizon stayed empty. The pressure returned after nightfall. This time it scraped. The sound traveled up through the hull like a blade dragged along bone. Wood fibers tearing, iron fastenings complaining. The entire structure announcing its weakness to whatever was listening. Men rushed the deck. Lantern light caught fog in ragged sheets. Someone swore they saw a shape pacing the ship's shadow, longer than the keel, moving with a confidence that suggested patience. No one leaned over, because something leaned back. A swell rose without wind, lifting the stern just enough for the rudder to groan. The ship yawed a fraction. The pressure eased. Whatever it was had learned something. History insists sailors are superstitious, that they invent monsters to explain fear. This crew did the opposite. They stripped the event of myth as fast as it occurred. They spoke in measurements, in force, in leverage. They compared it to known animals and found none that fit. A shark could not do this. A whale would not. An iceberg would not follow. By every known rule of logic, the ocean had deployed something that did not belong to the age of sail. The carpenter went below at first light and did not come up for a long time. When he did, his hands were shaking. He had found paired gouges along the waterline, parallel, evenly spaced, too regular for debris. Between them, punctures driven deep into oak thick enough to stop a cannon splinter. Teeth. Not tearing teeth. Holding teeth. The captain listened without interruption. He did not call it a beast. He did not name it at all. Naming gives shape, and shape gives comfort. Instead, he ordered watches doubled and lights masked. He forbade anyone from relieving themselves over the side. Buckets only. No exceptions. Because by every known rule of survival, routine was now a liability. That night it struck with intent. Not a ram. A shove, calculated, angled, aimed low just aft of midships. The hull flexed beyond what oak was meant to endure. A seam opened. Water found it immediately. Pumps were manned in silence, arms burning, men slipping in the dark while the thing outside slid along the ship's length again, as if counting heartbeats. One of the older hands began to cry. Not loudly, not hysterically. Just leaking sound, like air escaping a puncture. No one told him to stop. The mate wrote everything down by lantern light because if they died, someone needed to know the order in which hope failed. And then came the worst realization of all. Whatever was beneath them was not attacking to kill. It was hurting. By every known rule of combat, this meant the engagement had not yet begun. The Atlantic remained vast. The sky remained indifferent. And somewhere below the keel, something ancient enough to be forgotten entirely was deciding when to finish the work. The crew had survived the first night. History insists they should not have survived the second. 2 nights later, same latitude, same dead water. By every known rule of endurance, the crew should have broken by now. Sleep came in fragments measured in minutes. The pumps never stopped. When one man collapsed, another took his place without being told. Hands blistered, split, then went numb. Salt water soaked wool and never dried. The smell below decks turned metallic, iron, sweat, fear, and the sharp tang of fresh cut wood where seams had been wedged tight in the dark. The ship was no longer traveling across the Atlantic. It was being allowed to exist on it. The thing below made its presence known with discipline. Always at night, always slow, never wasting force. It pressed where the hull was weakest, withdrew, then returned somewhere else, mapping stress points the way an artillery officer maps trenches. No rational enemy behaves this patiently. At dawn, the sea would look normal again. Gray, indifferent, endless. That was the cruelty of it. The men began to dread daylight less than darkness, because daylight made the terror seem unreasonable. Night proved it was not. The captain gathered the officers on the 3rd morning. He did not raise his voice. He did not speculate. He stated facts. The vessel was losing ground to the pumps. Not fast. Not yet. But steadily. They could not outrun whatever tracked them. The wind, when it came, was wrong, short gusts that shifted without warning, leaving sails slatting uselessly while the sea beneath remained active in ways the surface did not explain. By every known rule of navigation, they were no longer alone in deciding their course. The harpooner, shipped only for a short leg, never meant to see open Atlantic, asked permission to bring his iron on deck. The request was absurd on its face. Harpoons were for whales. Whales came up to breathe. This thing had not surfaced once. The captain allowed it anyway, not because he believed it would work, because denying the request would have admitted helplessness. The weapon was laid out under canvas, lashed tight. No ceremony, no bravado, just preparation carried out with the quiet intensity of men digging trenches they know will not hold. That afternoon, the sea delivered another message. A seal carcass floated past, freshly killed. Not scavenged, not chewed. The body had been severed cleanly behind the skull, the cut smooth, almost surgical. Several men turned away. One crossed himself before remembering there was no priest aboard. By every known rule of predation, this was wasteful. It was also deliberate. The creature was feeding where it could be seen. That night, the attack escalated. No probing, no testing. A full-body impact against the starboard quarter, timed precisely with a swell to multiply force. The ship lurched hard enough to throw men from their feet. A mast groaned. The rudder screamed. Below decks, a seam burst open with a sound like gunfire. Water poured in. The pumps could not keep pace. The captain ordered cargo shifted to list the ship away from the breach. Barrels were rolled by hand in darkness, men slipping, cursing, straining tendons already near failure. The ship responded slowly, reluctantly, like a wounded animal forced to move. And beneath it all, the pressure returned, long, sliding, intimate, like a hand along a spine. Someone screamed that they saw it. No one asked for details. The harpooner cut the canvas from his weapon with shaking hands. He did not posture. He did not shout. He waited at the rail, body low, iron angled down into black water that reflected no stars. Then the sea rose. Not a breach, nothing so crude, but a displacement. A bulge in the surface that lifted and parted as something vast passed just below. For a fraction of a second, lantern light caught texture. Not smooth skin, but ridged, armored, moving muscle under scaled hide. The length of it exceeded the ship. By every known rule of natural history, such a creature belonged to another age. The harpooner struck. The iron vanished into the water with a force that nearly tore it from his hands. The line went taut instantly, then slack, then taut again as the ship was yanked sideways, hard enough to snap a belaying pin clean off. Men were dragged across the deck. The line sang, fibers smoking with friction. Whatever had been struck did not flee. Turned. The water erupted, not upward, but outward, as the creature rolled beneath the surface. The ship heeled violently. The mast cracked. A yardarm splintered. The line snapped with a report like cannon fire, recoiling back onto the deck in a lethal whip that missed killing 2 men by inches. Silence followed. Terrible, waiting silence. Then came the sound. Not a roar. Not a bellow. A low-frequency vibration that passed through wood, through bone, through the chest cavity, making men feel as if their own hearts were no longer fully under their control. Several dropped to their knees without understanding why. By every known rule of warfare, this was psychological dominance. The creature withdrew. Not far. Just enough. The rest of the night passed without contact. But no one slept. The ship limped forward under jury-rigged canvas, bleeding water faster now, the pumps falling behind by degrees too small to notice moment to moment, but impossible to ignore by morning. At dawn, the carpenter reported structural damage that could not be repaired at sea. Frames warped, fastenings loosened. The hull had been stressed beyond its design. The captain did the math. They could not survive another full strike. Not one. And that was when the lookout called down, voice breaking, not with fear, but with confusion. The water ahead was changing color. Not depth, not shadow, movement. A long, dark shape pacing them just beneath the surface, no longer hiding its position, no longer cautious, keeping station off the bow, forcing the ship to follow its lead. By every known rule of engagement, the hunter had decided the timing. The Atlantic stretched on in all directions. The crew understood something then that history rarely records. They were no longer trying to cross an ocean. They were being escorted through it. And whatever waited ahead had already been chosen. By every known rule of pursuit, the prey does not choose the route. The sea ahead darkened into a broad corridor, the color shifting from slate to near black, as if depth itself had risen to meet them. Sound changed there. Waves flattened. The slap of water against hull became a dull, muffled pressure. Even the wind seemed to hesitate before crossing that invisible boundary. The creature held position just below the surface, no longer content to remain unseen. Men leaned over the rail despite orders, not out of defiance, but because the human mind cannot endure proximity without sight. What they glimpsed came in fragments, an armored back breaking the surface for a breathless instant, a line of ridges running along a spine thick as a boat's keel, water sheeting off it as though off stone. No rational explanation survived contact with scale. The mate marked their course against the sun and froze. They were no longer holding a straight line. The ship's heading corrected itself in small, persistent increments, as if nudged from below. The rudder fought back uselessly. Every correction was answered by resistance in the water, pressure, drag, insistence. By every known rule of navigation, steering had become an illusion. The captain ordered reduced sail. Not to slow, speed was already meaningless, but to lessen strain. The crew obeyed with hands that no longer asked questions. Decisions now were mechanical. Thought had become dangerous. Below decks, the boys sat against the bulkhead, knees drawn up, faces gray. One asked if land could be near. No one answered. Land was an idea, not a plan. The creature surfaced again, closer this time. Not breaching, never breaching, but rising until its head displaced water in a long, low swell. Teeth broke the surface in an irregular row. Not the curved grin of a shark, but straight, conical spikes set deep, each one capable of puncturing oak. Several men stepped back at once. Because the head was wrong. Too long. Too heavy. I set forward, not to the sides. An animal built not to flee, but to commit. By every known rule of evolution, this thing was optimized for dominance. It submerged slowly, deliberately, as if to ensure it had been seen. Then it slipped beneath the keel and struck. Not the hull. The rudder. The impact twisted iron fittings like wire. The steering chains snapped. The ship yawned hard to port, sails flapping uselessly as control vanished. Men were thrown. One cracked his head on a hatch combing and did not get up again. The captain understood immediately. This was no longer harassment. This was disarmament. With steering gone, the ship could only drift where currents and pressure allowed. The Atlantic was no longer an obstacle for the hunter. It was a tool. The carpenter reported the damage without embellishment. Emergency steering could be rigged, but only if the sea allowed it. The sea at present did not. That night, the creature returned with a new tactic. It circled. Wide arcs at first, then tightening, passing close enough that its wake slapped the hull. Each pass stole momentum, bleeding what little forward motion remained. The ship slowed until it was barely moving at all. By every known rule of siege warfare, this was containment. The men felt it before they understood it. The realization that rescue was no longer simply unlikely, it was irrelevant. No signal would travel fast enough. No passing ship would wander into this dead zone by chance. The ocean had been cleared. The harpooner asked to strike again. The captain refused. One failed blow had already revealed the weapon. To try again without certainty was to invite retaliation they could not absorb. This was not fear. It was calculation. Calculation came too late. Just before dawn, the creature surged upward beneath the bow, lifting it clear of the water. The ship hung suspended for a heartbeat. Canvas, rigging, men frozen in impossible balance, then slammed back down with bone-cracking force. Frames split. Water rushed in from multiple points at once. Pumps were overwhelmed instantly. Men scrambled below, wading waist-deep, then chest-deep, shoving wedges into seams that no longer aligned. Barrels broke free and floated, pinning limbs, turning the hold into a crushing trap. One sailor was caught between cargo and ceiling and drowned standing up. Above decks, the creature surfaced fully for the first time. Not all of it, never all, but enough. The head rose, massive and scarred, eyes dark and unblinking. Its neck was thick with muscle, tapering back into a body that did not seem to end where water swallowed it again. This was not a serpent, not a dragon of story. This was an engine. By every known rule of terror, the display was intentional. It opened its jaws not to strike, but to show capacity. Water poured out between teeth longer than a man's forearm. The sound it made was not a roar but a rush of displaced sea, a reminder of mass in motion. Several men dropped tools and ran without direction. The captain did not. He stood at the rail, hands bleeding where he gripped splintered wood, and watched the thing sink back beneath the surface. He gave orders calmly, though he knew they would change nothing. Cut loose what remains. Lighten the ship. By minutes, the crew obeyed. Cargo went overboard. Iron, cloth, barrels. Each splash a small admission of defeat. The ship rose marginally, but the water kept coming. The pumps fell silent one by one as men collapsed. Then the creature struck again. Not the hull. The waterline. A tearing motion, sideways and precise, ripping planks free as easily as flesh. The sea rushed in with unrestrained force. The ship's fate was decided in seconds. By every known rule of history, this is where the record ends. But one final choice remained. The captain ordered the longboat lowered. It was madness. The creature was still there. The water was alive with it. No rational commander would abandon a ship into a sea already claimed. But staying guaranteed death. Men flooded toward the boat, discipline collapsing at last. The mate held the list of names and crossed out the dead with hands that shook too badly to be neat. There would not be room for all. As the longboat hit the water, something massive passed beneath it, rocking it violently. A wake curled over the gunwale. Hands slipped. Someone was pulled under without a sound. The creature was hurting again. Toward the boats. Toward open water. Toward a choice that no longer belonged to the men making it. As the ship began to go down, stern first, masts tilting, the captain looked once more at the sea around them, and understood. This was not an attack gone wrong. It was a cull. Minutes after abandonment. Open Atlantic. By every known rule of survival at sea, the longboat should not have lasted 10 minutes. It was overloaded, riding low, gunwales kissing the water with every shift of weight. Oars dipped unevenly. Hands slipped. The men were exhausted beyond calculation. Arms ruined by pumping, lungs burned by panic, minds fractured by days without real sleep. The ship behind them groaned as it died. A slow, terrible sound as decks buckled and the sea claimed its due. The creature did not follow immediately. That was worse. The absence created a vacuum of dread, a sense that the rules had changed again without explanation. The water around the boats was unnaturally smooth, disturbed only by the slow swell and the widening ring where the ship went under. Canvas vanished. Masts slid below the surface. Then there was nothing left but debris and men who no longer belonged anywhere. One boat carried 9. The other carried 7. They drifted apart almost at once. No one tried to correct it. Oars moved only enough to keep bows into the swell. Coordination required trust. Trust had been spent. By every known rule of maritime disaster, the ocean now decided who lived. The first sign came beneath the second boat. A shadow passed under it, broad, fast, unmistakable. The hull lifted as if riding a submerged wave. Someone screamed. An oar snapped cleanly in half as the water surged upward. The boat spun sideways, taking water over the rail. Men bailed with bare hands. Too late. The creature struck from below, not breaching, not surfacing, just ramming with controlled force. The keel split. The boat folded inward like soaked paper. Men were thrown into the water, limbs tangled, mouths open in soundless shock. The attack was surgical. No frenzy. No waste. One man was taken immediately, pulled under by the leg so fast his scream cut off mid-breath. Another vanished in a swirl of red that spread thin and pale as it diluted. The rest flailed, clinging to wreckage, eyes wide enough to show white even in low light. The creature surfaced once, just enough. A portion of its back broke the water, ridged and massive, passing between survivors with indifferent precision. It did not need to rush. The water was its terrain. The men were exhausted intruders. By every known rule of predation, resistance was no longer relevant. The second boat was gone within moments. The first boat watched it happen. That was the cruelty. 9 men sat frozen, oars slack, as the sea ahead erupted and then stilled. They heard screams. They heard bones strike something solid underwater. They heard the sound of air forced from lungs that would never fill again. Then silence. No one spoke. The creature did not approach them next. It circled. Wide, slow arcs that left the surface barely disturbed. Occasionally a ridge would appear, then sink. Occasionally, a dark mass would pass beneath the boat, close enough that men could feel displacement against the hull. It was counting. Not men. Time. One sailor began to pray out loud. Another told him to stop, not out of anger, but fear that noise mattered. A third laughed once, sharp and hysterical, then clamped his hands over his mouth and rocked. The mate tried to impose order. He assigned rowing watches that no one followed. He spoke of currents, of drifting west, of chance. Chance had left the situation days ago. The creature made its move at dusk. Not an attack. A push. The boat lurched forward as something massive slid beneath it, lifting the stern and turning the bow toward open ocean. Oars dipped reflexively. The boat began to move not by human effort but by guidance. By every known rule of reason, this should have been impossible. The men were being towed. Slowly, gently, with terrifying control. They passed debris from their own ship, planks, coils of rope, a broken spar. One man recognized a chest he had packed himself and reached for it before remembering there was nothing inside worth drowning for. The sky darkened. Stars came out, sharp and cold. The creature remained below them, present as pressure, as direction, as inevitability. When the boat drifted off course, it was nudged back. When the men stopped rowing entirely, they did not stop moving. Hours passed. No one spoke anymore. At some point, the water ahead began to change. The swell lengthened. The color deepened. The smell shifted. Less salt, more rot. A stagnant undertone that did not belong to open sea. The mate realized it first. He leaned over the side and dipped his hand into the water. Came up coated in a thin, oily film. He wiped it on his trousers without thinking. This was not a shipping lane. This was not a migration route. By every known rule of maritime charts, they had entered a place no captain marked. The creature surfaced once more, closer than before. Its head broke the surface just off the bow, eyes reflecting starlight. It did not open its jaws. It simply held position, blocking the way back. The men understood then. The ship had never been the target. The ocean itself was the battlefield. And this place, this dead, lightless stretch of water, was where the engagement was meant to end. The boat drifted forward, unopposed. Behind them, the Atlantic closed like a door.
First night adrift in the dead water. No recorded latitude. By every known rule of survival, men in an open boat do not sleep. They slept anyway, not because they were safe, but because the body, pushed beyond its limits, shut systems down without permission. Heads slumped. Hands loosened on oars. One man slipped sideways and would have fallen overboard if another had not caught his coat by accident rather than intent. The boat continued to move. That was how they knew this place was wrong. No current showed on the surface. No wind filled the air. Yet the boat advanced steadily, as if drawn along an invisible track. The water around them was darker than the surrounding sea, absorbing starlight instead of reflecting it. When the hull cut through it, the wake closed immediately, leaving no trace. The creature remained below. Not circling now. Stationed. By every known rule of naval engagement, this was occupation. At some point before dawn, one of the men woke screaming. He had dreamed of pressure, of ribs bending inward, of breath forced from his chest. When the others grabbed him, they felt the vibration through the hull at the same instant. A low, sustained tremor, like distant thunder transmitted through water. The sea itself was resonating. The mate ordered silence again, though his voice cracked. He had begun to understand what the captain never lived long enough to articulate. This was not a hunt. It was a relocation. As the sky lightened, the water changed further. The oily film thickened. Pale shapes drifted beneath the surface, jellyfish torn apart, fish stunned but not eaten, floating with eyes intact. Life existed here, but it was damaged. Interrupted. No birds flew overhead. That absence struck the men harder than any attack. Birds follow opportunity. Birds follow death. Here, there were none. The boat slowed at mid-morning. Not gradually, decisively. Forward motion ceased, as if a line had gone slack. The water beneath the hull grew unnaturally still, resisting the oars when the men tried to row. Each stroke felt heavy, thick, as though pushing through something gelatinous rather than liquid. The creature surfaced behind them, not to strike, to block. Its back rose in a long arc, scales catching the gray daylight. The length of it was impossible to judge. There was no end visible, just mass receding into water that refused to clarify depth. When its head emerged, it did so with minimal effort, eyes level with the boat, unblinking. No anger, no urgency. By every known rule of animal behavior, this thing was not threatened. It had brought them where it wanted them. The mate stood, ignoring the risk of capsizing. He stared at the creature the way an officer stares across a field at an enemy position he finally understands, too late to change the plan. "This isn't feeding," he said quietly. No one contradicted him. The water ahead of the bow began to move. Not with waves. With displacement. A broad circular disturbance spread outward, the surface dimpling as if something vast was rising from below. The men leaned forward despite themselves. The boat drifted closer. Then they saw it. The sea opened, not violently, not explosively, but like a wound parting. A depression in the water, wide and deep, where the surface sank inward toward a center that did not reflect the sky. It was not a whirlpool. The water did not spin. It descended. The edges of the depression were smooth, controlled, held in shape by something beneath that displaced the ocean itself. The smell intensified, brine, decay, and something older, mineral, like stone exposed after centuries underwater. The creature moved again, sliding beneath the boat and nudging it forward with unbearable gentleness. By every known rule of reason, the men should have jumped overboard. None did. Terror had reached a point where action felt meaningless. As the boat crossed the threshold of the depression, sound changed. The ocean's constant noise faded, replaced by a deep, muffled quiet that pressed on the ears. The water around them darkened further, turning nearly black. Below the surface, shapes moved. Not one. Many. Long silhouettes, slow and massive, coiling through the depths beneath the depression. They did not surface. They did not rush. They waited. The mate dropped to his knees. He understood now why the attacks had been measured. Why the ship had been hurted instead of destroyed outright. Why the boats had been separated. This place was not a hunting ground. It was a boundary. And the creature that had escorted them was not alone. The boat drifted to the center of the depression and stopped. The water beneath them began to sink. Slowly. Not pulling the boat down, yet, but lowering the sea itself, as if the ocean were being drained from below. The hull creaked as pressure changed. Men grabbed the sides, knuckles white. From beneath the surface, a shape larger than the escorting creature moved upward. So large that its outline distorted the water above it. By every known rule of history, nothing like this should exist. The men had seconds, no more, to understand what waited below. And then the sea began to fall away. No recorded date. No charted waters. By every known rule of reality, the ocean does not open. It did. The water beneath the boat continued to sink, not as a rush, not as a pull, but as a controlled lowering, as if some vast mechanism beneath the surface were drawing the sea downward. The hull creaked in protest. Men clung to the gunwales, not to stay aboard, but to stay oriented in a world whose geometry had begun to fail. Sound vanished almost entirely. No waves. No wind. No birds. Only the faint groan of wood and the slow, terrible movement of water retreating from where it should have been. Then the bottom revealed itself. Not a seafloor. A shape. Dark, ridged, and impossibly vast, rising into view as the sea drained away from it. The creature beneath them, larger than the one that had hunted them, larger than their ship had ever been, did not surface. It did not need to. They were descending toward it. By every known rule of extinction, this was how endings looked before anyone had language for them. The escorting creature surfaced one last time beside the boat. Its head rose level with the men, eyes fixed, ancient, unreadable. There was no triumph in them. No hunger. Only function. It had completed its role. The mate met its gaze. He understood then why sailors who survived spoke in fragments. Why logs ended mid-sentence. Why reports contradicted themselves and were quietly set aside by men who preferred storms and mutiny to explanations that broke the world. This was not an animal in the sense humans use the word. It was a system. The larger shape below shifted. Water rushed back suddenly, violently, as if released from a held position. The depression collapsed inward. The boat was slammed sideways, then upward, then spun hard enough to throw men against each other. One was lost overboard instantly, vanishing without a splash. The creature struck the boat, not to destroy it, but to end it. The hull split cleanly down the middle. Cold Atlantic water rushed in, stealing breath, numbing limbs in seconds. Men thrashed, screamed, inhaled water that burned like ice and metal. Hands grasped at nothing. The world narrowed to panic and pressure and the desperate need to breathe where breathing no longer existed. Below them, something moved. Not fast. Inevitable. One man was taken whole, drawn downward in a single smooth motion. Another felt teeth close around his leg, not tearing, not crushing, just holding, pulling, removing him from the surface as easily as a net takes fish. The mate surfaced once, gasping, eyes wide with understanding rather than fear. He saw the escorting creature disappear into the depths, its task complete. He saw the water close. He did not scream. By every known rule of history, there should have been no witnesses. And yet, weeks later, wreckage washed ashore hundreds of miles apart. A section of longboat, split with impossible precision. A coil of rope bearing deep punctures that did not match any known bite. A single oilcloth notebook, waterlogged but intact, its final pages warped by pressure, ink smeared where a hand had shaken too badly to write cleanly. The official inquiry ruled the ship lost to weather. They always did. But among sailors, the story spread in a different form. Not as myth, not as legend, as caution. Of waters that are not empty. Of creatures that do not hunt the way men expect. Of routes that should not be sailed too confidently, no matter how many times they have been crossed. Early Atlantic sailors swore they were attacked by a monster from another age. History smiled, nodded, and moved on. The ocean did not.